Welcome to Artistic Adventures. This is part 5 of our Hocus Pocus project, and we're going to be working on Witch Mary's dress today. We're not going to finish her completely because it would just be too long. I'm going to save the cape and the hairdo to the next video. But we are going to complete the full dress part. So here's our doll from last week that we had finished the face and everything. We're going to work on the shirt first. It's sort of a peasant blouse kind of thing, and then we'll do the rest of the costume. So it looks like to me, like the peasant blouse with the gathered top and the gathered sleeves, kind of loose fitting, and then it has that red vest over it. So I'm going to use the doll sort of as a guide, and I don't use patterns. I'm just gonna make a basic loose cutout of a top with wide sleeves, and I think that that's gonna work. So look at these new scissors I got. These are real fabric scissors. I love them, and I'm not going to use them for anything but fabric, and they cut so great. Oh my gosh, yay. They came with a little pair of snippers. I'll show you in a minute. Anyway, so I'm cutting everything pretty loose fitting. I'm going to cut it over to the middle of her neck, and that should be the middle of her body. This will be the front, and then I'm just going to fold it over and use that side to cut the other side as my pattern, and then we'll do the back separately because we want the back to have an opening, so we'll have to cut that a little bit bigger in the body part. All right, so I'm just cutting off those big sleeves that we'll gather, and just want to hold it up to her and see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I don't really care how long it is because it's going to be tucked under the dress, and I actually want to make sure it's long enough so that it won't pull out from the skirt as we're putting the skirt on her. So just cutting the neckline down a little bit. Don't want to cut it too much because these dolls just don't have a whole lot of real estate on them. You know what I'm saying? So we will have to turn that neckline over. So I just want to make sure that it's appropriate and not too low. All right, so we're going to take this and use 1/2 of the side as a guide, but we're going to have to make the body part wider because we're going to have that open in the back, and we'll need to be able to fold over the edges of the opening to finish it. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this part of the side. These scissors cut like butter, I'm telling you. It's so nice. I'll leave the link to them. I got them at Amazon. I'll leave the link just in case you're really in the mood to have a really nice pair of dress cut or fabric cutting scissors. They really cut the fabric so nice. My other scissors were just getting, they're not very expensive. Now here I'm cutting it over like another, I'd say 3/4 of an inch from the center. So I'm going to fold this, but I wanted to cut it the half, wider. So this part will be a little bit bigger. And then just to do the same thing, using that side to cut the other side as the pattern. And then we'll cut this part in two down the center seam. So that will be the opening in the back. And I didn't cut the neckline as far down as I did in the front, just a little bit. Just a little bit, not too much. Who was the chef that used to say that? Was that Emerald? I can't remember. Anyway, okay, so that's our back. And the front part will be one piece, like that. So I think that's going to work. All right, so I went ahead and I hemmed the neckline of the front, and then I went back and added a gathering thread. Now I'm going to take the two end threads on one side and tie them in a knot so that when we gather it, I won't pull the gathering thread all the way through. That can happen sometimes when you're dealing with a small piece that you've gathered. If you start pulling it, you could just pull the thread all the way through. So this will stop it, and also be able to cut those threads and get them out of the way, which I like to do. I hate these loose threads hanging everywhere. So just snip those off, and then I can pull the thread from the other side and gather it. And this will be the gathered neckline. You know, in a real peasant's blouse, there would be elastic in the top usually. But for this size doll, we're just going to go ahead and gather it since we're going to have an opening in the back. So if you had elastic in there, you might pull it over your head, you know. So that's kind of how it's going to look. I'm going to go ahead and tie this off on that side too so that the gathers won't come out. And then we're going to work on the back. All right. So I did sew the seam in the back down both sides so I can overlap it, and also hemmed the neckline on the back. So we're ready to put the two shoulder seams together. And actually it's the shoulder seam and the top of the sleeve. So I started lining this up, and I had the front I had the back against the sleeve. Anyway, so what you want to do is put the two right sides together of one side of the back and the front, and then we're just going to sew along the top of the sleeve, and that will include the shoulder seam, and that will also go right into where we hemmed the neckline, so that'll be a finished neckline all the way around. So we've done both sleeves now. So I'm going to fold the sleeve over so you can kind of see how it looks. So now we've got the two tops of the sleeves, and we've got the neckline hemmed and everything and gathered. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hem the sleeve, and we're going to put a gathering thread in that as well. And then we'll just gather that up, and that also probably, you know, on a peasant blouse would be elastic, but we're just going to gather it. All right, so I did back and forth sew that one in, and I was going to cut it, and I was like, no, if I cut it, sure enough, if I pull it, it's not going to work. So I went ahead and tied a knot in it, and I'm glad I did, because I could tell when I was pulling it, it might have pulled through, even though I back and forth sewed it on that one side. All right, so we cut off that, and then we're going to do the same thing we did on the neckline. We're going to pull one of these threads. Doesn't matter which one. I usually pull the top one, but it doesn't really matter. We're just going to pull that and gather it. The thing you don't want to do, though, is pull one and then the other one, because that'll lock it up. And then you won't be able to gather it anymore. All right, so I'm just gently pulling that so I don't break the thread. And I want to try to keep it open enough that I can get her hand through it. I don't want to have to take her hands off, so that looks pretty good. I am going to have about 1/4 of an inch seam, so I'm trying to take that into account. And I'm going to go ahead and tie a knot in that side as well to lock it down, and we won't lose any of our gathers, and we can get rid of the threads. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Tie a knot on the one end and then pull the other side, make our gathers till we think it's the right size, and then go ahead and tie knots on that side too. All right, now we're ready to sew the underarm seam and then down the side of the tunic. Now I did also have to hem the bottom of the tunic too, so that I think I did that all at one time in the video. Yep. All right, so we've got the side seam, and I did snip it. These are the little snippers that came with those scissors. They cut real good right on the ends, like it's good for snipping seams or snipping thread. They're not like for cutting fabric or anything like that. They're just little snippers. All right, so we're ready to turn the sleeves, and I'm just using a paintbrush to help me get them all the way turned. And I'm liking how this is turning out so far. It's looking good, looking how I wanted it to look. I snipped those underarm seams just so they would lay better once you turn them. If not, it's going to pull and pucker up. All right, so now we're going to see if we can get the hands through that opening without having to take them off. In case you do yours too small and you don't know it, you can pull the hands off of the Monster High dolls. It's just a little, like a bead thing, and it pops right back on. All right, so that actually worked really well. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sew this tunic on the doll. If you didn't want to, you could put Velcro on the back as a closure. But this doll, as far as I can tell, is never going to be anything other than Mary the Witch with that face. So we're just going to sew the tunic on her. I don't think she ever wore anything but this one costume either. So, and what I'm going to do, just so it doesn't show that much, is I'm going to sew my seam on top of the thread that shows from where I hemmed the edge of the back. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to go right down the top of that thread, and that way it just, you really can't see it at all. It just looks like it's closed by some other means. So just sew right down the top of that line of the thread that shows from the hem. And I'm going to speed that up a little bit because that's boring. But so far this has gone really well. Sometimes when I do these costumes and I'm making up patterns, they don't always fit right, and so I have to like redo it or whatever. But so far this is working well, and I guess it helps too that it's a loose fitting garment, so it's not like it's really tight fitting, and there's less likelihood of it not closing in the back or whatever. All right, so there's our loose tunic top. I could also be a dress. So if you want to make a dress for your doll, there you go. All right, so we've done that part. Now we're going to do the skirt. Now she has a skirt. Her main skirt is this plaid color. You can't really see it in the picture. So we're going to make a circular skirt out of this, but also one that will have some gathers in the waist. So that means that the waist opening will be bigger than usual when you want to have gathers, okay? And I'm not going to do it. I want to save some time for myself. You can use the same technique that I used making Sarah's skirt, where you use something to measure and mark all the way around to make the circle. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this one because the fabric is really close to where I want it to be on her feet anyway. But I am going to do one thing. I'm going to mark where her waist is because I want to know that. That's the one important thing that I need to know to cut it the way I'm going to show you. Okay? So I just put a mark there, and we're going to come down a little bit lower when we cut the waistline. So because of that, we want the length to be a bit longer than the bottom of her feet, if that makes sense. Okay? Because if you cut the waistline down and then you cut it at the bottom of her feet, it's going to be shorter. All right? So now I'm just going to cut off the bottom part of that fabric where I had marked that I want the length to be. Really easy to cut plaid fabric because you have lines. That really helps so much. All right, so once I get that done, then we're going to start doing what we need to do to cut this in a circle. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is fold this over and get it so that the edges are together. And I can still see my mark where I want the waist to be. How far up? All right, so there's my mark. And the length will be from there down. That's how I want the length to be. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the opening for the waist. And then we'll be able to do our folding and then cut it so that it comes out in a circle. If you're not comfortable with this, like I said, you could do the technique I used for Sarah where you mark around the same length and then you use that as the guide. But I've done this so many times with so many different things that I'm just going to save some time since I've already showed you that technique. And we'll show you something different. It's more advanced circle cutting. All right, so now we're going to fold this over so that the center of the waist, so you've got like, you're folding it in a half of the circle over. And then we're going to cut this part, and that's going to really give us a square for our purposes. All right, so we're going to cut that part off, and then we'll get rid of the rest of this fabric. Not a big plaid fabric person myself. I don't know why, I've just never really liked it, but anyway. All right, so there's her waist. Now we're going to fold this over again. And then we're going to flip it so we can see the short part. All right, so there's the short part. And that's really our guide for the length of the skirt. So we're going to fold it one more time, keeping the short part up because that's where we want the length to be. Now you want to cut this sort of in a curve. You don't want it to be flat, so you're going to kind of curve it as you cut it, like that. So it's like an ice cream cone kind of look. All right. And now when we unfurl it, it should look like a circle. That's pretty easy, right? Yeah. All right. So the one thing we have to do now is to put some fray check on it, as this material does really look like it's going to fray very easily. It's sort of a woven, loosely woven fabric. So I'm going to get a piece of aluminum foil, and I doubled it so I have enough room for everything. And I put the fray check all the way around the outside and the waistline and let it dry. So it's dry now, and I'm going to save that piece. Going to be that piece of aluminum foil. I'm going to be using that again later. All right. Now I also put fray check down about 2.5 to 3 inches, and I'm going to cut right down the center of that fray check to make sure that the edges are sealed. And then I'm just trim off any loose threads from the fabric that came out. All right, so now I'm going to put a gathering thread in here. So I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, put that gathering thread in, and come back. With the magic of editing, it happened immediately. All right, so now we're going to pull this thread and gather this up, and then we're going to put it on the doll so we can see just how much we need to gather it. And I'm going to go ahead and lock down this one end. So I'm going to tie my knots in there to lock that down. And I really think her costume looks sort of like she might have been like the housekeeper for somebody, or maybe she was just a housewife. Like, her costume seems more simple and more utilitarian than the other two costumes. The look of the plaid and the pockets and the apron that she has just sort of look like that. All right, so we're going to put our doll in here, and then we'll measure how much gathers we need, and then we can tie a knot in there to hold the gathers in while we sew it together. So I want to double that over on the edges where the opening is, just so it looks a little more finished. So I want to allow a little bit more fabric than having it just meet together. So now I'm going to take some needle and thread in this dark burgundy color that I'm using to sew with for her other outfit. You'll see in a minute I use this on the apron. All right, and then I'm just going to turn over the edge of one side and hold that down, and then turn over the edge of the other side and lap that over a little bit. And then we're just going to sew that together. So up at the waist, I put a couple of stitches just to make sure that holds really tight. And then I'm going to keep that folded over so it's nice and neat. And then I'm just going to sew down that back seam. And it's kind of right on top of a red line in the plaid, so it really didn't show it. The thread didn't show at all. And once I get down to the point where the end of that opening is, then I'm going to go through to the other side and tie my knot so that it holds. And I usually put 2 or 3 knots I just want to make sure that it holds really well. Because there's nothing worse than having something come open after you've finished everything. You know what I mean? Yeah. So put more knots than you think you need. Always. Like always cut things longer than you think you need them to. Because you can always cut them shorter, but you can't make them longer. All right. So we finished that part of the skirt. We don't have to worry about that upper part being too finished looking because her vest is going to come down over that. So we're just going to leave that just the way it is. Now, this vest is going to also cover the apron, so I want to make the apron part next. And I really could figure this out a little bit better from watching the movie, how this looked. She also has 2 pockets on it that are just a little different color, they seem like, than the fabric of the apron. So I have some material that's not quite as shiny as this that I'm going to use for the pockets. Now I'm just measuring basically there with the doll beside the fabric where her waist is, and doesn't have to come quite as far as the skirt because it's an apron and it's going to go over the skirt. So I'm just going to cut out the piece of the length that I think or the width that I think it needs to be. And basically it's almost a square, maybe not quite as wide as it is long. And I used the selvage edge for the bottom, but I'm still going to hem it, and then we'll gather it along the top. So I cut that out, put the fray check around the edges other than the selvage. Now I've got this piece of material that I'm going to put squares in for the pockets. I'm just going to draw those in with the fray check, and then I'll cut them out after it's dry. This is the same material used for Sarah's cape. It's kind of a flowy kind of material. So I'm going to let that dry, and once they're dry, I'll come back and cut out right on the fray check, and that's kind of an easy way to do it so that you get your square shape the way you want it, and you get the edges sealed as well. And then once we get these squares cut out, we're going to sew them onto the apron. Now, if I was making an apron, for human size, I would turn the edges over on the pockets. But for her, I'm not. I'm just going to sew on top, kind of where the fray check is, and I'll do that in the U shape, leaving the top part open. But I am going to do that on the sewing machine because I think it'll be fairly easy to sew this. And it was. So there we go. That's how I sewed it. And the fray check will probably dry a little bit more, get a little bit less dark, so it won't be quite as obvious. But so the next part we're going to do, I've hemmed the edges, and then the top part I put a gathering thread in, and I've already locked down one side. So we're going to take the threads on this side and pull them to gather the waist. If I can get them apart. It's always the difficult part. All right, so gently pull that. Don't pull it so hard that you break the thread. And we're going to pull it so that it goes halfway around her waist. So I'll have to measure it here in a minute. And then I'm going to tie a knot in the other end to lock it down. And then we're going to sew a ribbon on top of that to tie it. All right, so that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and tie my knots there to lock down my gather thread. And then that red ribbon that you see there, we're going to sew that right on top of the gathers. So you're not going to see this. I know it doesn't exactly match. It's not, as dark, but you're not really going to see this anyway because the vest is going to be on top of it. So just sew that down. It's just a, good way to tie it. And an apron probably was tied on anyway, so it's somewhat authentic. All right, so we've got our apron. And we're going to go ahead and tie it on the doll. And, if it was a real apron, we'd probably tie it in a bow. And I thought about doing that, but then I thought, no, I don't want to have anything that bulky underneath there. So I just tied it in a knot and cut the ends off. All right, so we've got our apron on, and now we're going to do the vest. This was the hardest part for me because of the fabric. This is sort of a crushed velvet, I guess, fabric, but it's stretchy. The one she has, it's sort of fuzzy looking. I don't know that it's necessarily crushed velvet, but this was the only kind of fuzzy looking reddish fabric I found in the fabric store, so that's what I got. But it ended up being so hard to sew on the sewing machine. I cannot tell you. It pulled, it stretched, the foot would run off off the edge. It just was not easy to sew. So I ended up actually sewing a lot of this by hand. But here's the one side of the front, keeping in mind that I would have to have seams down the front and also on the side and up at the shoulder seam as well. So we're going to cut another one of these for the other side. And then we'll cut the back. Now, as best I could tell, her vest comes down sort of in a point in the front past the waist, similar to what we tried to do with Sarah's vest. So as you can see there, I've kind of angled it down. So once we get the seam sewed, it'll kind of look like that. All right, and there's the two pieces. And now we're going to take the fabric and lay it out and sort of position these front pieces as if they had been sewn together so we can get an idea of the width that we need for the back. And I'm turning this because there is sort of a nap to the fabric, and a nap is where you have something sticking up the fuzzy part, and if you rub it one way it's smooth, the other way it's rough or whatever. So I want the nap to be running the same way for the front and the back, so that's why I turned the fabric the way I did. Okay, so I've kind of got the pieces put together there, and we're going to cut a back piece pretty much the same along the top, other than the front there we're going to cut straight across. We're not going to have a point. And also the back of the neckline I won't cut quite as deep as I do the front. So hers, the front is kind of opened down a ways and it has lacing, so we're going to try to do that as well. So I'm just sort of measuring it on the doll to make sure I have lots of room for seams and everything. And I don't want it to be very tight fitting since she's kind of heavier looking. I want her to have that, heavier look. So the first thing we're going to do, as usual, is the shoulder seams. It's the easiest way to do these small pieces. So we're going to sew the shoulder seam. That's hard to say. On the sewing machine, and like I said, this was my first inkling that this was not going to be easy fabric to sew. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was to sew the bottom part of the front and then up the front and then along the neckline, down the front, and over the bottom of the other side of the front. This is where it really was very, very apparent that sewing on the sewing machine was really not great with this. Probably wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't so small, but trying to sew a little tiny seam or hem, something really tiny like this, it just did not work well. So I don't know what kind of fabric you guys are using, but this one was hard. All right, so now I'm just kind of measuring to see where we are, because I know we want to try to have that front part be a little bit open. We're going to sew it at the bottom, but we are going to try to have it sort of open at the top. So looks like I got plenty of room for side seams, so I'm going to go ahead first though and hem the sleeve line. As you can see right here, this curve, that's the opening for the sleeve, or it's the opening for the armhole. There's no sleeve. And because I had such a hard time with the sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and sew this by hand. I just don't think there's any way I would have been able to sew this on the sewing machine because it would have slid all over the place. And because the thread, matches the fabric so well, and also because it has this nap to it, the thread really doesn't show when you're sewing like this. So it really is almost like you couldn't even see the thread from the other side. So it worked out well. So I'm going to do both of the armholes here just by sewing it by hand. And then we're going to sew the side seams together, and then we'll start working on the front part. All right, so I've got both of the armholes hemmed. So now we're going to fold it over, right sides together, and sew the side seams. I did have to hem the back. I didn't see that until I started trying to sew it, but I did have to hem the back too. And then things matched up really well on the sides. So what we're going to do now is sew the bottom part of the vest together up about a third of the way. So we're going to start down at the point and then come up about a third of the way. And the way I'm sewing that, not overlapping it, that right there is a good picture of my hand in case you wanted to know. That's how my hand looks. All right, so I turned it around so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And basically just doing a whip stitch back and forth, and then I'm going underneath and tying a knot. And that's as far up as I wanted to come. I ended up having to tie a knot with my hands because the thread got knotted, if you wondered what happened there. All right, so just looking at how everything looks and figuring out how we're going to do this lacing. But I do have this red cord that I had bought it to use with my Blythe dolls because they have a pull cord, but it was a little bit too big. So I think I'm going to use this to do the lacing of her vest because it's pretty much the same color. It's pretty much the same red, all right? So we've got this opening here. Now, if you look at the picture, she has gold rings that the lacing goes through. Kind of hard to see, but right at the edges, you'll see the little glint of gold. And the lacing goes through those gold rings. So we're going to use these jump rings. And you want to make sure you take some pliers and just press them so that the opening is closed on the ring. Otherwise, the thread will go through it. So I'm going to go through from the back to hide my knot in the thread down at the bottom. I'm going to try to put 4 of these gold rings on each side. And that way we'll be able to do enough lacing so that it'll actually look like lacing. So here I'm just using some pliers to make sure it's closed and also press it together so that it's flat. Every time I'm looking at her while I'm working on her with that face, it's almost like she's grimacing from pain from what I'm doing. It's kind of funny. All right, so I have my thread doubled, so I'm only going to put 2 loops through each of these rings. That will be 4 threads, and that should be plenty enough to hold it. And naturally, they get caught on everything, her hands, her hair, her foot. So you see, I'm positioning that down right at the bottom. And I'm going to put 2, like I said, 2 loops through there, and then just to hold it, just to make sure that it holds well, I'm going to put a knot on the back side, or put an extra stitch back there. And then I'm going to run the thread up through the back side so I don't have to cut the thread. So it's just going to be a continuously running thread through there. So just take your needle and kind of go through the back of the fabric up about 1/4 of an inch. And then you're going to come out on the top of the fabric. I got another knot in the thread. I just love that when that happens. Always gotta happen. For me, anyway. Alright, so here we are. We're going up through the back of the material, about 1/4 of an inch, maybe not even that much. And we're going to come out, and that's where we're going to put our next ring. So slip the ring on the needle, and then again we're going to put 2 loops in there, put a little knot in the back, and then we're going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit because it's boring. Not boring, but it's repetitive, and you've got the technique down, so we'll just speed this up so we get it over with and move on to the next part, I guess. And like I said, just spacing them out so that I had enough room to put 4 loops on there. And then the thing you want to do on the other side is just to make sure you get them in the same position so they are matching across from each other. The same. Otherwise, it's going to look weird when you try to lace them up. I did cut the thread there to start over at the bottom, but using exactly the same technique, I'm just going up and making sure that they're opposite the ring on the other side. And then I think it'll look good when we lace it. That cord is a little bit heavy, but I think it'll be okay. I guess you could use thread or maybe embroidery thread. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to use this because I've got it and I don't want to buy something else. So this cord is made out of a synthetic material, and you'll see here in a minute that one of the ends was a little bit frayed and it started being hard to get it to go through the ring. And when that happens, all you need to do is just heat it, and it kind of melts a little bit, and that fuses all of the fibers together so that you're able to have a nice end that will go through things. Once it starts fraying, it just gets bigger and bigger. Now it's just trying to wet it there with spit, basically. My spit. But here you can see it's just too big. It's not going through. I tried to cut it, but it looks like it was just going to keep fraying. So I had to bring out the old Bic lighter and torch it. I have to do this when I'm doing my Blythe dolls too, because these ends get big and then you can't run them where you need them. So it sort of melts it a little bit, and then you kind of press it with your fingers. Don't do that before it's cooled off a little bit though, because you'll get burnt. But I've kind of learned, from doing it, how soon I can. All right, so we're just lacing that up like you lace your shoes up. I don't want to pull it too tight because I want you to see the lacing. And then I'm just going to cut it. I'm not going to try to tighten a bow since it's sort of a large thread. It really would be bulky. All right, so we've got our cute little lacing. Now, the next thing that we're going to do are these gold rings that are on her vest. I kind of imagine, like, if she was like a housekeeper, they could be like rings that she kept the keys of the house on. Like, they used to have keys for everything, like the larder had a key and the cheese box had a key or whatever. I don't know. But that's kind of what I'm imagining these could be used for on her costume. Who knows? But they're decorative and they make it look like her, so we're going to add them. So I'm using some bigger rings here, but again, just make sure you've got the opening closed off or the thread will come through. I have these little box of jump rings that you saw. They come in graduating sizes for both gold and silver and bronze, because I use them all the time for different things. I mean, some people use them for jewelry. I end up using them a lot for my dolls for different parts of costumes and stuff, but I think I got them at Michael's, if I'm not mistaken. They weren't that expensive because they're not like real gold or silver, but for something like this, they're fine. You know, it's not like jewelry that you're going to be wearing and that will wear off and turn green on your skin. All right, so we got one ring on. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, and we're going to speed it up a little bit so we can get through this. And this is really the last part of the costume. Like I said, I just felt like this was, I think it ended up being about 43 minutes long, and if I had tried to go on and do the cape and then her hair, and I had to come up with some shoes for her, it would have been way over an hour, and that's just too long. So I'm going to finish up this ring, kind of give you a look at how she looks overall, and then that's kind of going to be it. So the next video, we'll work on her cape, which will be pretty much like the one that we did for Sarah. It's going to have the collar and the hood, because their capes all kind of look the same. But this kind of gives you an idea of how she would look, you know, once we're finished with everything, except for the hair, of course. But I think it turned out really cute. I like it. And I think it looks a lot like the picture, too. As much as you can with these smaller sizes, you know. But I really love the lacing. I thought that turned out really cute. Oh no. So when we do her cape, it was sort of a drapey material, and it seemed to have sort of a texture to it, like lines in it, almost like a crinkle fabric. So the fabric that I got to do the cape with is even another shade of this red, this sort of theme of red, cranberry, red, burgundy. I'll show you this material. You can see in the picture it is like a different color, almost like a little bit of orange in it, and it's kind of crinkly looking, kind of soft. So this is the material that I got for that. It's kind of a little bit orange, I guess. So we're going to do that. We're going to do the hair. We'll come up with some shoes for her, and then we'll be finished with Mary in the next video. And then we get to work on Bette Midler's character. That'll be so fun. So, hope you loved it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. That always helps. And as always, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.